Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Franchise Hockey Manager 9 series focused on rebuilding the Chicago Blackhawks. We have recently completed our 2027 to 2028 season. Good news for the Blackhawks is that we did get back into the playoffs after a 2-year absence. Good news is that we gave one of the top teams in hockey, the Anaheim Ducks, all they could handle in a series. Bad news is we did end up losing that series 4-3 with a 3-2 overtime loss yesterday. So, as I noted, our season is now over. I'm going to take a look in this episode at the prospects in the Blackhawks system. We kind of did a review of the players on the NHL team last episode. Also try to get the roster settled a bit before the end of the playoffs and the official end of the season for everybody else and heading to free agency. Have made an offer already to bring back Sawyer Mineo, minor league defenseman. And then we also recently signed Xavier Veilleux. May remember that he is was a first round draft pick of ours a few years ago. I believe maybe 2024. Yeah, first round draft pick, 28th overall in 2024 for us. Just concluded his career at Harvard, where he spent 4 years, and certainly seems to have a profile that he could be a useful defenseman for us in the not so distant future. So we have him on the AHL roster right now, which he is not thrilled with, but certainly think that he could be, at the very least, an 8th defenseman for us next year, with potential to be everyday player in the lineup by the season after that. But probably going to spend a little time next season going back and forth between Rockford and Chicago, if I had to guess. So thinking about the young talent on the Blackhawks, although we didn't have a first round pick last year and we won't have a first round pick this July, traded those both away to pick up our starting goalie, Jasper Wellstat, who's hopefully going to be a huge part of our future. We do kind of have two paths of young talent to talk about. First is players who are signed to contracts but aren't necessarily on the NHL club. So these are players who are either in the minors or playing back in their home country that we have signed. And then we've also got the unsigned talent that we've drafted or otherwise acquired in recent years. So just kind of looking at some of the youngest players in our system. Tate Dolinsky and Carter Klippenstein, a couple of prospects we drafted in the past. Both have 3-star potential. Don't know that either of them is going to ultimately be a difference maker, but certainly think that they are guys who could contribute at the NHL level if we have some injuries, and perhaps, be starters for us for, some period of time down the line. Ryerson Leanders is a young goalie. Spent most of his time the last couple years in the ECHL, but we did promote him to the AHL last year. Certainly, as I mentioned, building around Wallstat is our plan, but could Leanders be our backup goalie 2 or 3 years from now? Certainly possible. And I'm going to skip over the guys like Victor Eklund, Mathis Dubé, Nathan Villeneuve, who are already contributing at the NHL level. Jordan Forget is a guy we drafted a couple years ago, split last year between the ECHL, where he played just 9 games, and then the AHL, where he was actually pretty productive, scored 47 points, including 19 goals in 59 games. Right winger, definitely going to be in the mix for contributing at the NHL level this coming season. Looking at his bio, he is a guy that we picked in the 7th round, so kind of surprising that he has developed so well at this point, but obviously happy to have had that happened. And as I mentioned, at the very least, similar to what I was talking about with Veilleux, is going to give us a player who can maybe split next year between the AHL and the NHL and perhaps be a bigger contributor down the line. Then we got a couple of guys who are overseas. Linus Eriksson, had him spend last year back in Sweden. We will certainly have him with the NHL. Actually, maybe that was not. I'm not sure if that was the Swedish league or not. I guess it was. Had him back there last year. Honestly, we could have used him at times. We were a little light on forwards. Unfortunately, when you send a player, an international that you've drafted, back to their home team, they're there for the season, and you don't have the option to bring them back like you would with a minor league player. So that was probably a little conservative by on our end, but didn't have him around last year, but he will be this year. Adam Jecko, similar situation for the young Czech player, living legend back home, although he's unknown in the United States, but a guy who we are going to have back next year. He is a player that we just signed him as a free agent. Interesting. About 2 years ago. He was never actually drafted in the NHL, but he's become someone who at least looks like he could be a contributor at the NHL level. And similar to Veilleux and Eriksson, probably going to be splitting next year between the AHL and the NHL. Tyson Buksowski was up in the NHL a little bit for us this year with injuries, but has primarily been a minor leaguer. Parker Forlin, another prospect, along with Guillaume Filion. Don't know that either of those guys is going to be a huge player for us for the future, but they're still young players with some potential who are signed. And then the last of the players that's 22 or older who is not yet playing at the NHL level is Reggie Newman. Spent all last year in the ECHL, probably one of the weaker prospects of this crew. He's going to have to improve in a lot of areas to ultimately be an NHL player. But for a guy that we picked in the 7th round 3 years ago, to have him still at least in the system and contributing his depth is something. And then the other crop of young talent that we have is obviously the unsigned players who we have drafted in previous years, have the rights to, but just have not signed to a entry-level contract yet. One of them that we will be making an offer to very shortly is Sasha Voisvert. You can see he's got no team anymore. We've got to sign him by this August. He has now completed his career at North Dakota. Don't know that he's a huge prospect for us at this point. But he is a guy, as I mentioned, we picked him round 1, 2024, 32nd pick in the draft after we won our Stanley Cup championship, and certainly want to see what he can do. And then we've also got to sign late next month when the window opens up, Julian Mays, who is the other former number 1 draft pick we have. Picked him 15th overall 2 years ago in 2026, coming off of a brilliant season as a 20-year-old with Everett in the WHL, where he scored 58 goals and 68 assists, 126 points in 68 games. So he really showed a completely different level of dominance this year with a game rating of 90. Probably was ready to contribute at a higher level than the WHL, but we were conservative with him. So those are the 2 number 1 picks that we have waiting in the wings. Looking at former 2nd round picks, Tomas Vesely is a player who has been in Czechoslovakia. Certainly looks like he could be a fairly dynamic offensive player. pretty good physical ratings. Not going to bring a lot to the table defensively, and his mental ratings are definitely mixed. But the former second rounder is someone who is certainly still in the mix for us. Don't have to sign him till 2030, though, so probably not going to happen imminently. Similarly, goalie Tyler Goodfellow is 18 years old. Picked him in the second round last year. Was with the Sarnia Sting this year. 298 goals against, 891 save percentage. Not a big-time prospect, I don't believe, but still somebody that we're going to continue to monitor for the next few years. Other than those few first and second rounders that we've picked, you can see we've got a lot of later round picks who are still in our system. If I go back to the screen that we were just on, we do have about 7 or 8 players who we're going to have to make decisions on by either June 30th or August 15th, including, as I noted, both of the first rounders. So we'll try to get both of them signed. Boisvert doesn't have a team right now. He's a free agent, I think, in a little glitch of the... he might not be a free agent quite yet, but we need to get him signed regardless before he becomes a free agent. And Mays, same thing. Going to get both of those guys signed. Take a look at the later round picks. I don't know that there's too much to do with them. Otherwise, looking at some high potential players, Roy Chung, you can see is one of the higher potential players, tied with Mays at least by the dreaded star ratings. Chung was a guy that we picked in the 5th round back in 2024. He has put together a nice career, St. Thomas in the NCAA, and is now ready to move on to the next level. So I think we'll bring him on board. And then other than that, we mentioned Boisvert, Tomas Vesely, we mentioned him. Last but not least, Milan Hano, Slovakian player that we picked in the 6th round last year, coming off of a relatively unexciting offensive season with just 1 point in 36 games for the young defenseman. Another guy, not sure. He's got a lot of growth that he still needs to make before he's going to be a viable NHL player. And at the age of 21, don't know that that's going to happen. But we still see some potential in him. As you can see, unfortunately, we don't see a ton of potential in a lot of the other players that are in our system who we've picked up in the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round over the years. So the cupboard is not entirely bare, but certainly after we sign the former first rounders, Mays and Boisvert, and we're going to sign Chung also now. So there's not going to be a ton of high-level talent. And given that we don't have a first-round pick this year, we're going to be a little light in terms of supplementing the players who we have rights for. But hopefully that will change starting in 2029 when we will, assuming we don't do something over the next 13 months, 14 months, when we will finally have a number 1 draft choice again. And we are going to sign Sasha Boisvert now, and he is showing up as a free agent. You can see he's listed as the 8th prospect in hockey, the top prospect that we have on the Blackhawks. I don't really like that where when a player is done with their 4-year college career, even if someone has the rights to him, they kind of get kicked out to be a free agent. I think it seems a little buggy to me, but it is what it is. But we are going to go ahead and give him his entry-level contract at this point and hopefully get him signed. Looks like he signed with us immediately, similar to what we did with Vayu. So we've got him on board. That's positive. And then back to the prospect rankings. You can see he's our top prospect among forwards, ranked 8th. Not a lot else there for the Blackhawks. Have to go down to Vesely and Mays, who we mentioned earlier, who were 57th and 58th. And then we do have in Xavier Veilleux, who we were talking about that we just signed, the 11th prospect in terms of a defenseman. So some of these guys definitely can be helping us, hopefully in the not-so-distant future. And then Tyson Buksowski, who we mentioned, is also listed among the top 100 prospects. Taking a look at the system rankings, we're actually ranked fourth. That's better than I would have thought, but Boisvert and Veilleux are both top 11 prospects, and they're both players who we've recently signed, literally today, to their entry-level contracts. Other than them, Eriksson, as I mentioned, will be bringing over from Sweden. Mays we're going to try to sign shortly. And then Vesely is a player who he's kind of more a decision for us. Do we let him play another year in the KHL before trying to sign him, give him a little more seasoning, or do we bring him over now? That's still a decision. But overall, the Blackhawks have a pretty good prospect system, at least according to the world-famous FHM9 rankings. So hopefully that'll help us continue to move this team forward. As I mentioned, the good news from this past season is that we were back in the playoffs, and in addition to the good news of getting back into the playoffs, we're also going to have some money to spend in the offseason. You can see right now we're at about $70 million in terms of our salary, although that does include the recently signed Boisvert, who, for keeping the roster at 23 and knowing what our salary situation really looks like a little better, we're going to move him down to the AHL, but he certainly has a chance to be on the NHL team next year. But you can see we've got about $12 million, $13 million in salary space next year. And we do have a few players that are going to be coming off contract with big money, notably Sam Bennett and the injured Bo Horvat that we won't be re-signing. So we've got some youth in the system that's on the way to help us. We've got a little bit of youth in the system that's not quite on the way to help us, but may be able to contribute in 2, 3, 4 years, but feel like the big wave of the top talent is coming over the next 12 to 18 months, given that we just haven't had number ones last year or this year. In looking at our system, most of those top players are pretty much ready for the NHL, or at least being on the AHL/NHL shuttle at this point. So we've got that youth coming, and we've also got the opportunity to hopefully make some moves in free agency with the money that we have left. And taking a look at the upcoming free agents, there is some potential talent out there, most notably Quinton Byfield. I do think with a lot of these players in their early and mid-20s, their teams should sign them over the next month, month and a half, 2 months before we get to free agency. So the high-end talent is probably not going to be as good as it looks right now. And other than Byfield and then the aging goalie Vasilevsky, no huge talent. Obviously would love to sign, some of these guys in their early 20s, but have to think that their teams are going to lock them up before they hit free agency. But we will find all of that out in about 2 months. So it doesn't look like there is a Connor Bedard or Connor McDavid or a top-end talent to really focus on in free agency this year, but hopefully we'll be able to find someone who can help us. And with that, we're going to start simming through the playoffs, find out who ultimately becomes the Stanley Cup champions, start working on some of the decisions at the back end of our roster, and then when we get to the end of June, start signing those players to entry-level contracts that will have the ability to sign where we have the rights, most notably Mays at this point. Start making some of those decisions, start seeing who signs as we get ready for free agency, maybe make some plans about what's out there. As I mentioned, in a perfect world, would certainly love to keep our first round draft pick next year, since we haven't had one at this point since 2026. But always going to be looking at the trade market. If there's someone who can really push us over the edge in a positive way, which I don't know if there really is a positive way to be pushed over the edge, but if there's someone who can be a difference maker for us, certainly would think about picking them up in trade. And then we'll see what's available in free agency in July. And sometimes we can't help but step right into it. The young defenseman Matteo Rotundi involved in an off-ice incident. Media's taken notice and the fans aren't happy about it. But fortunately, his teammates are not particularly bothered by it. Rotundi, former first-round draft choice from our first draft with this team in 2023, has finally been up half the season last year and then a full year this past season. Pretty good potential, only 22 years old, and certainly when we look at his profile, has some pretty interesting offensive ratings for a defenseman. Think he can contribute even more offensively than he has, particularly in terms of assists. Pretty good passer and puck handler. Very good physical ratings, okay defensively, and okay-ish mentally. Hopefully those are the areas where he'll continue to improve. But it seems like it certainly could have been a worse incident in terms of team harmony. Doesn't look like it's even caused any conflict. So it looks like he's going to be on the front page of the local papers for a day or two, and there may be some fans who aren't totally pleased with him when we start playing again in October. But given that we've got a lot of time until that's going to happen, hopefully time will heal some of those wounds. Taking a look at our job security, still pretty good shape with owner Rocky Wirtz. But the fans are not pleased with us. We've definitely got a pretty low fan happiness level, even though we got the team back to the playoffs this year. So hopefully, and we won't have a number one draft pick to bring on a top prospect. Perhaps, as I mentioned, we'll be able to bring on a free agent or two that gets the fans excited. And then most importantly, hopefully we'll start winning a lot more games next year and get the fans on our side with some more of those very useful 5-game winning streaks. And we've simmed ahead far enough now that we know who's going to be in the Stanley Cup playoffs. It's going to be Dallas and Pittsburgh. Anaheim, who took us out, was upset in the second round by the Kraken, who were just taken out by the Stars. And Pittsburgh really devastated the New York metro area and the Northeast in general, taking out the Rangers, taking out the Islanders, and then taking out the Bruins to make it to the Stanley Cup playoffs. So a couple of 2 seeds with Dallas and Pittsburgh. Looking at the standings, Dallas had 100 points on the year, and Pittsburgh had 100 points on the year. Both finished second in their divisions, so 47 wins for Pittsburgh, 46 wins for the Stars. Does make us think that, we won 44 games, so the puck bounces a little differently or slides a little differently in a few games. And, especially with some of the young additions we have coming and the ability to take on some contracts and some talent in free agency, we may not be that far away from competing for another title. And speaking of competing for another title, the World Championships are also going on right now, which has given, since we've been out of the playoffs, a lot of our players an opportunity to continue honing their skills. You can see Sweden just lost to Russia, but Kemp, Rasmus Anderson, and our goalie Jesper Wallstedt all involved in the game there. We've had Jaracek playing for Czechoslovakia, Forget, the youngster, playing for Switzerland, Paginaimi, who actually will be a free agent that we're unlikely to sign, playing for Finland. A lot of other players around too. Montour, who we're going to be moving on from, Jaracek, and then the youngster Veyu playing for Canada and or the Czech Republic. Looking at Slovakia and the United States, even our veteran star defenseman Quinn Hughes getting some action there. So good to see some of the better players on our team representing their countries in the World Championships. Hopefully won't have any injuries, but hopefully they'll continue to hone their skills and get better and better, and hopefully some of them end up with a little hardware for the trophy case as well. And Russia ended up beating Slovakia in the World Championship. We didn't have any players involved in that game, interestingly. Bo Horvat, set back from his injury, still going to be gone more than a week or two. He is a 33-year-old free agent, a player still looking for over $5 million a year, who at this point in his career has been a little bit exposed to injury, but also more importantly, just at his age, not a big time player anymore. And with all the young talent we have on the way, certainly will not be bringing him back. And some decent development, given that we weren't really playing in the month of May, except for one game at the beginning of the month. The youngsters Eklund, Jaracek, Korchinski, and Rotundi at the NHL level continue to get better. And you can see a lot of the players who we have rights for, or who are in our minor league system, continuing to get ready. Most notably Boisvert, who we just signed, improving his leadership, getting open, as well as his positioning. So good month for the youngster there. Sam Bennett and Adrian Kemp, two of the guys that we traded for this past season to supplement our roster when we had a lot of injuries and get back to the playoffs, which, as I mentioned, we did end up doing, both moving in the wrong direction. Bennett's contract is going to be up. He's going to be a free agent. No harm, no foul there. We did have to take on Kemp for another season, and he's going to be making over $6 million next year. Cap hit's going to be over $7 million. I think, although he is getting older, he can still be a productive player. He did score 34 goals last year, although only 20 combined this year between Toronto and the Blackhawks, and only 4 with us. We are going to put him on the trade block. I don't know that we're going to definitely move on from him, but if there is someone out there interested in Kemp with the amount of money he's going to be making next year, we certainly need to be thinking about that option. We'll have to see what's available in free agency. If there's some real top-end talent that makes it there that we weren't expecting to see, we could go a little crazy perhaps. If not, then maybe we keep Kemp around and open up the money from his salary a year from now. And I don't normally spend much, if any, time on the Hall of Fame voting, but I did notice that the guy who played professional hockey into his 50s, Jaromir Jagr, finally on the ballot. So certainly have to give the great former Penguin, former Ranger, respect. Not going to spend a lot of time on it otherwise. We'll vote for Thurin Fleury also. Patrice Bergeron, and want to throw a goalie in there. We'll go with Tom Barrasso over Mike Vernon and Sean Burke. And perhaps interesting in a year that Jaromir Jagr is certainly going to make the Hall of Fame, the Pittsburgh Penguins are your Stanley Cup champions. Sid the Kid is still contributing. Connor McDavid, a member of the Penguins at this point. Taylor Gauthier, goalie. And you can see they had some tough series out in the East. They ended up, going to 7 games, coming back from a 3-1 deficit against the Rangers in the first round. Also went against to 6 games against the Bruins, but after losing Game 1 in the finals against the Stars, 4 wins in a row for the Penguins, who are your Stanley Cup champions. You can see I almost said Pirates there. If you've been following our Out of the Park baseball series, you might know that I'm playing with the Pittsburgh Pirates there. So hopefully we can duplicate at some point what these Penguins have done winning the title. And as we get closer to the end of June and the new NHL year, got a lot of decisions to make on our coaching staff and our scouts. Won't bore you with the details, but at this point, 6 seasons into this playthrough, we like most of our coaches and scouts, so tend to think we will be looking to extend the contracts of almost all of these people. Ooh, and interesting in the Hall of Fame runoff, one spot's potentially coming down to Mike Vernon versus Tom Barrasso. So since I voted for Barrasso originally, got to continue to vote for him, although I can't say that I've looked at either of their statistics or their resumes to really know who is ultimately more deserving. All right, we've now simmed ahead to June 23rd, so some of the unsigned players who are approaching their signing deadlines we can get on board. Most notably and most importantly, the only first-round draft pick we have rights to that we haven't signed yet, Julian Mays, need to sign by a week from now. Talked earlier about the huge year he had with Everett this past season, so we are going to look to bring him on board with his initial NHL contract. We'll go ahead and meet his demand, ask for a response, submit an offer to Mr. Mays. Hopefully we will get him signed. Other than that, as I mentioned earlier, most of the other players who have a deadline right now are former 6th, 7th, 5th rounders. Not sure who we need to bring on board. Definitely want to bring on Roy Chung. Got till August 15th with him, but we'll bring him on board. Rest of the players, though, just not a ton of potential. You can see Connor Bear, 2-star guy. Dagnay, I'm sure some of you will get me on the pronunciation for that. Another 2-star guy. Miller K, another 2-star guy. Strome Vatne, 1.5-star potential. Vasic is the guy. Little older, still only 2-star potential, but could give us a versatile forward for our system. Got to make a decision on him. He is a 4th-round pick, is one of the higher guys out there. And then, as I mentioned, we will sign Chung when we move to the next NHL year in early July. We'll bring Chung on board. We'll make an offer to Vasic here, although I just don't see him being a big-time player for us. He's already 22 years old. Even his organizational depth, he's kind of meh. So maybe we won't make an offer to him. Taking a look just more broadly at who's got the ability right now. Tomas Vesely. He's got some potential. and is a guy that certainly looks like he could be an interesting contributor at the offensive end of the ice. We do have time with him, and I don't think he's ready to contribute next year, although wouldn't stink to have him in the organization. Issue is that there's a chance that we would just send him back to the KHL even if we do sign him. But we've made an offer to Mays. We're going to make an offer to Chung. Vesely's kind of the only other guy that we really face a decision on. And we don't really face a decision on him because we do have his rights until June of 2030 that we have to make a decision on him. Given that we've signed a couple young players, including forwards, and we also have those young forwards who were in our minor league system last year and or are coming over from Europe, I think we'll just let him spend another year in the European juniors, KHL juniors. Second round pick back in 2026. They think he is a player that will ultimately sign, but I just don't see him doing much of anything for us next year, so would rather wait at least another year before we get the clock ticking on his contract. And as we get close to the new NHL year and free agency, the free agency preview, Quentin Byfield, as we expected, certainly looks like the top player out there. Guy coming off a 33-goal, 44-assist season, 25 years old. Certainly someone that we could be in the mix for, can play center or left wing. We're going to have holes at both positions. Left wing has historically been a little weaker for us than center, but we're certainly moving on from Horvat at center as well as Sam Bennett. So we're going to have some potential playing time there, especially for a big-time player, and then certainly at left wing where we're going to be moving on from Alex Formenton, and we don't necessarily have the highest level talent. Certainly would think that he could be a contributor for us. Vasilevsky, not going to be going after a goaltender. We've kind of made our bed signing Jesper Wellstat to a big extension after trading 2 first-rounders for him. So he is our goalie of the future. Winger Chinikov, from Columbus, certainly looks like a pretty interesting offensive player. Pretty good physical ratings, decent mental ratings, pretty good offensive ratings. Doesn't bring a lot defensively, but not really his job. And then last but not least, Matty Beniers, another pretty good offensive player. Would be nice if none of these guys get locked up over the next week and do hit free agency. At least we'll have some interesting options out there potentially. Taking a look at our team, older players generally hitting free agency. Samuel Urson is a 28-year-old goalie we've had in our system last couple of years. Never needed him at the NHL level. Formenton is a player who kind of has become less important to us over the last couple of years. You can see played just 33 games last year, so was kind of a 22nd, 23rd guy on our roster most of the year, except for when we had injuries. Paganaimi hasn't been as dynamic an offensive player as we hoped after we brought him on board. 15 goals and 11 goals in his 2 seasons with us, looking for decent money. He won't be back. Talked about Bennett and Horvat, a couple of centers in their 30s. And then Brandon Montour is a contract that we brought on last year. Ended up stashing him in the AHL. Was just a little of organizational depth at defense that we, I think, brought back in one of those trades, if I remember correctly. Yeah, when we traded away Konechny. and got 2 first rounders from Boston. We had to take Montour and his salary on, but we were fine to do that since we had a lot of salary space and we needed to get rid of Konechny to clean up some locker room issues. So we're not going to be losing a ton, and we've got the money to potentially add some talent in free agency. So really looking forward to seeing who's actually going to be available and what we're able to do to keep improving this team. And we did get the young left winger Julian Mays signed to his deal. So all of our former first rounders are now locked up. And as we've talked about extensively, we won't be adding another first rounder this year. But got Mays locked up and got the rest of the crew on board. Feel pretty good that some of the guys that we've signed to their first contracts will be definitely contributing at the NHL level. If not at some point this year or this upcoming season, certainly over the next 2 or 3 years. And not surprisingly, in a year that the Blackhawks just barely made the playoffs, but no big awards for the Blackhawks this season. MVP to Sebastian Aho, a guy that we thought about signing as a free agent a few years ago, but couldn't pull the trigger on. Connor McDavid with the Conn Smythe. Michael Misa, 60 points in 67 games, the Rookie of the Year. And Jamie Drysdale getting the Norris Trophy for the Ducks. So now it's time to move forward to the final day of the 27-28 season and see how we do in terms of getting a few points to improve our abilities. We are doing a GM/coach thing this time around and haven't been focused on the coach part of it. Only a season score at 19, so not a great season. Only positive things that happened were a winning season and reaching the playoffs. So unfortunately, just 3 points available to improve our abilities. As I mentioned, I generally play as GM only, but did for some reason, probably some pressure from some viewers and comments from them, decide to do the GM/head coach thing this year. But you can see that until last season, I had kind of forgot about that, and I haven't been putting any points into my head coach ratings, which is not going to do great, but we'll bump up in-game tactics a little bit, so we are at least a little bit above that minimal level we started in terms of tactics, in-game tactics, and player motivation. Also going to still continue to improve our negotiating skill and player management a little bit. Wish we had a longer run in the playoffs or a more successful season so we'd have more points to kind of spend, because certainly all of these areas, including discipline and self-preservation particularly given that the fans don't like us all that much right now, although ownership still does. That could be more important. And then certainly, we're not going to be focused on a day-to-day so much as the head coach is actually coaching the position groups and some of the physical stuff. But I think that tactics, in-game tactics, and player motivation are the first areas we should put those points as we get more points. And then we can sprinkle them into some of those other things going forward. But definitely more focused on the GM ratings. Wish I had more than 3 points to improve myself based on our performance this past year, but the performance on the ice is what it was, and that's what we deserved as far as the points. So we are going to do the long sim ahead to the new year, the new hockey year, starting tomorrow on July 1st, and then we will quickly check out who's available on the free agent market and move on and finish up the episode. We're not going to be making any offers on the free agents until our next episode, but at least want to let you know who makes it out there so you can share some thoughts with us down in the comments. So just a few things to note from running the off season. Sidney Crosby, at 40 years old, won a Stanley Cup, was still a productive player last season with 17 goals and 46 assists. Only playing 14, a little less than 15 minutes a game, but won the Stanley Cup at age 40, and then went out on top. So that was interesting to see. Taking a look at owner confidence, a little closer to home for us with the Blackhawks. Satisfied with our performance last year. Note that the fans are unhappy and view me as the problem, but he still says replacing me is out of the question. At least some of the blame for the team's performance this year rests with your predecessor, but we hope you don't disappoint us next year. So not quite as positive talk as we've typically gotten from him. A little bit of new season optimism, which is good. Job security still pretty high. Expects us to be in the top half of the league, which should mean a playoff spot. That would certainly be the minimum goal that we would have as well. Other than that, not a ton to talk about with the Blackhawks. We had 3 scouts retire, so we'll be looking to replace them in relatively short order. Going to work on the annual budget right now. We do have a new arena that is already under construction, should be ready for the new season in 2029. So we're only a year away at this point. That happened relatively quickly, although it was a few years ago. We've been selling out almost every game, and we did get back to the playoffs. The fans hate me. I'm gonna make them hate me even more. No, we're gonna wait on ticket prices till next year. But we'll certainly do normal maintenance on the arena. Normal wage budget should be fine. Gonna focus on player development as much as possible, and we're gonna maybe do a little more marketing spend than normal this year, just to kind of hopefully build some buzz ahead of the new arena, the old school sports arena, opening next season when we move out of the United Center. Taking a look at the monthly budget. Don't have any games coming, so don't mind if we don't have a lot of attendance. But we're going to keep team morale and scouting is at the highest levels possible. We are generating a lot of revenue and points with this team, so feel like we've got the ability to spend some money on scouting and player development. And taking a look at the roster, the salary situation with the departure of some of those older players, $68.7 million. So certainly have opportunity to bring on one huge contract or multiple pretty high contracts in free agency if we decide that's the way to go. And looking at the free agents who are available, a lot of those younger guys, not surprisingly, were signed by their teams, which is more realistic. You're not going to see a lot of great 21 and 22-year-olds hitting free agency. So kind of glad to see that, even though kind of weakens the talent pool a little bit. But certainly Quinton Byfield definitely stands out as a big-time player. Scored 24, 9, and 33 goals the last 3 years. 9 goals in 20 games, though, so that was still a pretty productive year. Arguably his most productive year with 25 goals in 20 games. Certainly a excellent player as far as his mental, physical, and offensive ratings. Defensive ratings still a contributor. Let's see what he's looking for. $8.5 million for 3 years. That certainly is something that we would think about doing. He could definitely help us. Left wing Yegor Chinnikov, another pretty good offensive player, 22, 25, and 31 goals with 45, 55 assists the last few years. Very dynamic offensively and physically, pretty good mental ratings. Doesn't bring a ton to the table defensively, but he can hit people and stick check a little bit. Decent defensive read. He's looking for $6 million a year for 5 years. So certainly in the mix. And then Matty Beniers, another really talented physical player, really good mental ratings, strong offensively. Hasn't been as productive on the ice. 13 goals in a full season 2 years ago, and then last season did improve to 26 goals, even though his ice time was down about a minute and a half. Looking for $7 million for 2 years. So there's some decent top-end talent. Not going to go through everybody right now. We're going to focus deeper on free agency in our next episode. But certainly with Byfield, Chinnikov, and Beniers, certainly an opportunity for us to improve our front line, which is an area that probably needs some improvement. You can see we've got the youngsters, Mays, Eriksson, Dzeko on the roster right now. How many of them will really make the NHL roster is up for debate. Could certainly use some help at right wing. Feel pretty good about Marner. And Shields is a young player who has a lot of potential. Kemp, as we mentioned, is on the trade block, but we are in the final year of that contract, so certainly not going to cripple us, and maybe he'll be a little more effective now that he's been skating with the guys on the team for part of last year and then all of training camp this year. Center, Villeneuve, Larkin, and Sillinger are the top three. Frank Nazar is a guy who could ultimately slide back out to right wing or maybe left wing. And then left wing right now, Sharangovich and Eklund are probably our top 2 players, but we've got the ability to bring on some help. So it's going to be interesting. It's hard to imagine to me that we aren't going to make an offer to at least one of those top flight free agents. Just going to be a matter of scouting them a little more, doing a little more thinking, and figuring out whether one or two of them can potentially be a big contributor to what we're trying to do here with the Blackhawks in the upcoming season and over the next few years. So we will find out, or start finding out, the answers to those free agency decisions in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.